More countries are set to endorse a Palestinian state as humanitarian conditions continue to deteriorate in Gaza. Hello, I'm Arnold Gnaidu, and this is The Heat. Spain and Ireland, along with Slovenia and Malta, have reportedly agreed to take the first steps towards recognition of a Palestinian state, seeing a two-state solution as essential for lasting peace. In the wake of the Gaza conflict, support for Palestine has been gaining momentum. I spoke with the founder of the Palestinian National Initiative, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, about that and the latest on the ground in Gaza. Dr. Barghouti, thanks so much for joining us. I want to start with some of the latest diplomatic developments. There are more countries that will now recognize a Palestinian state formally in the coming days. Among these countries is Spain as well as Ireland. There are other European Union countries that recognize Palestine as a state as well, but it will add to the 142 countries that already recognize a Palestinian state. There are some analysts who are saying that this is largely a symbolic move. It's nothing of substance. How do you see it?
No, it's actually of great substance. Of course, it will not end the Israeli occupation or system of apartheid and oppression of the Palestinian people, but it will create a new legal status, confirming that Palestine is a state under occupation. And it will, to a large extent, undermine all the Israeli efforts to change facts on the ground through illegal settlement activities and illegal changes of the facts on the ground. It also sends a very powerful message to Israel that it cannot continue to reject the rights of the Palestinian people to be free and independent. But more than that, it puts all these countries, like United States of America and Britain, in front of a very serious responsibility. It will show them that they cannot continue to speak and claim that they call for two-state solution, while actually they are practicing hypocrisy by not calling for the end of Israeli occupation and not calling for the removal of all Israeli illegal settlements from the occupied territories, and by not recognizing Palestine. It puts them in front of their responsibility, that they cannot claim that they're supporting a Palestinian state while they are actually giving Israel the time to kill and finish the possibility of a Palestinian state through settlement activities.
Speaking of a two-state solution, last week the Arab League met in Bahrain, and the League reiterated its call for a two-state solution. In fact, the 22 member states that met also want a Middle East peace conference. How will that announcement, that communique from that meeting, impact what is happening right now?
I don't think it will have any impact whatsoever, because it was really a weak statement and a repeated statement and did not make any serious change. The problem is that many of these countries continue to normalize with Israel while Israel is committing war crimes against Palestinians, something that the International Criminal Court has just indicated. And while Israel is committing a genocide, as the International Court of Justice has also indicated that this is a plausible genocide, the least that was expected from the meeting of the Arab countries is to declare the cancellation of all normalization agreements with Israel till Israel abides by international law and till Israel stops this terrible war crime that it is committing on Gaza.
Now, your party, the Palestinian National Initiative, it supports a two-state solution with East Jerusalem as Palestine's capital. But there are others which disagree with that. Not disagree, but they don't believe that that is possible. There are some, like Tarek Bakoni, who's president of Al-Shabaka, the Palestine Policy Network, who says that a two-state solution is a fantasy. And I'm going to quote him here, this piece that he wrote in the New York Times. He said, fundamentally, the concept of a two-state solution has evolved to become a central pillar of sustaining Palestinian subjugation and Israeli impunity. What do you make of that? Does he have a point?
Absolutely, I agree with him. As a matter of fact, I myself wrote an article in The Guardian about a year ago in which I said Israel has killed the two-state solution. And the only solution is one democratic state with equal rights for everybody. But if a miracle happens, and let's say the Americans elect Bernie Sanders as their president, and then he forces Israel to remove all its settlements from the occupied territories and end the occupation and allow the rise of a Palestinian state, we would not object. But the reality is that Mr. Tariq is correct. He is right about saying that Israel is killing the two-state solution and that the idea of two-state solution has become just a way of giving Israel time to finish the process and continue the persecution of the Palestinian people. And as you know, the Israeli establishment and government refuses neither a Palestinian state or one state, one democratic state. So what is their solution? Their solution is nothing but ethnic cleansing, which they are trying to commit now in Gaza, or genocide, which is also they are trying to commit now, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So in reality, yes, if this continues, there will be no place for two-state solution. And then the only solution will be one democratic state, because we as Palestinians will never give up, will never surrender, and we will never leave our country. We will stay whatever it takes.
I want to turn now for a moment to the situation in Gaza. One proposal we are hearing from people, mainly supporters of Israel, is that this military operation that Israel is conducting will end if Hamas releases all the hostages that it is currently holding. Would you support that? Would you agree with that?
That's a lie, because Hamas was ready to sign an agreement in which there will be a full exchange of prisoners and all Israeli prisoners would be released in exchange of releasing many Palestinians who have been in Israeli jails for decades, including one who has been there for 42 years, and the end of war. But Netanyahu said no. He wants the release of his prisoners, but to continue the war. And he is the one who undermined that agreement. So Israel wants to take back their prisoners without releasing Palestinian prisoners, who are now 14,000, and want to continue the war as well. That's what Netanyahu declares every morning. So the reality is that Israel is the one that does not want this war to stop. And Netanyahu practically doesn't care about Israeli prisoners. He knows he will kill them all with his bombardment, as he has done already to tens of them. And that's why I think the problem here is with the Israeli government that continues these war crimes, regardless of all the international criticism of what it is doing.
Now, as far as the humanitarian situation is concerned in Gaza, the United Nations says barely more than 300 aid trucks have entered the Strip since Israel began its offensive. In fact, the United Nations humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, is warning of what he calls an apocalyptic consequence due to aid shortages. There are more than 630,000 people who fled the city of Rafah, which is in the south, as the Israeli military continues to intensify its attacks on that area. What can you tell us about the situation there?
It's absolutely horrifying. We have starvation in the north. We have now starvation in the south. We have hundreds of thousands of people who have no place to be in, to stay in. There is no safe place in the whole of Gaza Strip. Israel claimed that they would move the people, the population. They ethnically cleansed them from the north to the center and then to the south, claiming that Rafah will be a safe area. Now they're attacking Rafah as well. And just moments ago, it was the news broadcasted that Israel is invading all of Rafah now and putting 1.4 million people at risk, very high risk. So people are dying because of bombardment. People are dying because of starvation. People are dying because of diseases due to lack of water. A whole Palestinian population in Gaza Strip are now subjected to terrible war crimes. And that will not, there is no way of dealing with that, because Israel is also preventing any humanitarian aid, any serious humanitarian aid from getting to Gaza. And that means not only starvation and famine, but also sickness and diseases and death. That is the reality of what we have today in Gaza.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Edmund Ghareeb is an academic and Middle East analyst. Saeed Arikat is the Washington correspondent for the Palestinian newspaper Al-Quds Daily. And Amotz Asa-El is a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post and a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Amotz, let me start with you first. Let me get your response to what we heard there from Mustafa Barghouti, saying that more and more countries are recognizing Palestinian statehood. He says this creates a new legal status that puts Palestine in a situation where it is seen as a state under occupation. It also sends a powerful message, he says, that Palestinian rights cannot be denied. What is your response to that?
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it's all formalities, and it's the great tragedy is that this is where Palestinian leaders are escaping rather than get down to the business of state building, which is what the Jews did decades before they got their own state from the United Nations back in 1948. For the previous half century, the Zionist movement built a state gradually, incrementally, building a healthcare system, building factories, building power stations, building jobs, and building banks, and building a whole infrastructure for a state, an economy, commerce. This is what the Palestinians would be wise to do if they really want a state, and not to get diplomats to declare empty declarations. That is what you'll get here. As for the two-state formula, this program's viewers know that this Israeli and millions like him are emphatic supporters of this idea. He's storming into an open door.
Okay, Saeed Arikat, the United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to back the Palestinian bid for full membership at the UN. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that Israel will maintain open-ended security control over Gaza and partner with local Palestinians. These are Palestinians not affiliated with Hamas, and partner also with the Palestine Authority to govern Gaza. I mean, where do you see this going?
Yes, thank you for having me, and greetings to the panelists, definitely to Dr. Edmund Ghareeb. Well, let me just say this in response to the Zionist build and all this. The truth of the matter is the colonial West that built in Israel. They created this colonial base for their own purposes and still serves that purpose. The Zionists built nothing. They stole land, they killed people, the indigenous people, and so on. But the struggle will go on. The Palestinians will continue to fight. Obviously, the entity that collapsed any prospect for a two-state solution is Israel. It has done so all along. It has done so one prime minister after the other. The Palestinians went along wrongly. I think it was a wrong thing for Yasser Arafat to agree to the Oslo Accord. It was a big mistake because it only allowed the settler colonial project in Palestine to go on, to steal more land, to build more settlements, and so on. So the United Nations pays lip service, and it talks about a two-state solution. But as long as the United States has the power and the only power, basically, to veto any such resolution, the struggle will go on.
Right,
and
Saeed.
The occupation will go on, the killing of the Palestinians will go on, and the genocide will go on, and the destruction will go on. Israel does not build, it destroys. It destroys.
Okay, Saeed, can I ask you this, Saeed? When you say the Palestinians will continue the fight, to what end?
Right. The Palestinians, like any other people on the face of the earth, they have to continue their fight until they can free themselves from the shackles of occupation. Because the world stands with them. The world knows that what Israel is doing is criminal. This is a state that was basically born in criminality, continues by criminal deeds, and continues by killing and destruction. So what do you want the Palestinians to do? Evaporate? They're not just gonna go away. They either, the occupation must end, either like Dr. Barghouti said, you can have a one state, the one democratic state,
Yeah.
where Jews and non-Jews can live together and be happy with one another like we do in this country.
Yeah.
That's the only way. So the Palestinians, as long as they are under occupation,
Right.
denied basic rights, the most basic of rights, they will continue to struggle. You can rest assured of that.
Okay, Amotz, go ahead. Your response to that?
Yes, this is basically the presentation of the very negation and total dismissal of the idea that the Jews deserve a state of their own, that the Jews are a nation.
Well, have it in Europe. Have it in Europe.
Please don't interrupt
have it in
me.
Europe. You don't have it in
Please don't interrupt
Palestinian
me. I
land.
did not interrupt you. Please do not interrupt me. It's very difficult for you to hear the truth, I realize, but here's the truth.
Yeah, your truth is so twisted.
One moment, Saeed. One moment, Saeed. Amotz, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm saying once again that this is the presentation of the very thinking that we Jews do not belong in our land, the land of David, Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jesus, and the rest of the heroes' Jewish history.
Okay.
This is our land no less than it is the Palestinians' land. If you do not acknowledge this, we indeed will be fighting in perpetuity.
Right.
If you will acknowledge this,
I am personally an atheist. I don't believe in biblical
Don't interrupt
needs.
me, please. It's difficult for you to hear the truth.
Okay, one
You
moment.
have to hear
What
it.
truth? What truth? You're just
I heard
you're uttering
you out.
pure,
Now hear me
pure
out.
garbage. What you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, you're both talking. We can't hear. Amotz, finish your thought, and Saeed, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Right.
I'm saying once again that unlike what was said here, nothing was done unilaterally before 1948.
Yeah.
This is untrue.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Every tract of land that the Jews settled until 1948 was bought for money.
Okay.
Formally, legally, officially, it's documented.
All right.
So why it was stolen?
Yeah. Saeed, Saeed, very quickly, your response.
Very quickly.
I need to move on. Very quickly, your response, yeah.
Sure, very quickly. Look, the land was not bought. He knows that. About 5% of Palestine was bought, and it was sold by non-Palestinians and so on. So he knows that. Palestine was inhabited by peasants. There's history, there's documentation. This is a made-up story. It's a nonsensical story.
Settlement that was established in
It is a nonsensical story.
Okay, listen.
For money.
I have to move on. I have to move on. Okay, I want to get to Edmund Ghareeb. Edmund, let's turn to the potential for a two-state solution. I mean, that has surfaced more and more as more and more countries talk of recognizing a Palestinian state. But, you know, as we just heard in that interview with Dr. Barghouti, I cited to him that article in the op-ed piece in the New York Times in which the writer said that that's a fantasy. It's actually a ploy that will actually entrench the occupation.
Unless we see radical changes in the positions of various parties, and primarily the Israeli party in this case, we are not going to see a two-state solution. There was talk about two-state solution for a long time, since Oslo and a little bit before that, but then since then, but in reality, the idea of the two-state solution was rejected by the Israeli governments, and especially by political leaders such as the Prime Minister Netanyahu. They do not want to see a two-state solution. In fact, what they are very much interested in is expanding the territory that would be under Israeli control. And if possible, as we began to hear after the beginning of the recent conflict, the recent fighting taking place in Gaza, there was an effort to expel even, although it was called a voluntary movement of population, but it's really to expel the population to Sinai. And later there were ministers in the Israeli government who said that maybe they should go to Europe, and or the Europeans also should contribute, and other parties, to the cost of moving the population from Gaza to outside of the area. We've heard from a number of Israeli officials who say that they want to start building settlements again. We heard a number of them started putting ads in newspapers to sell property on the coast of Gaza. All of this shows that since this government in Israel, which is a right-wing government, an extremist government, they are not really willing to see the creation of a Palestinian state. And if that is not going to happen, I think ultimately it has to be one state for all, a democratic state for Jews and Palestinians.
Okay.
The question is, would the Israelis like that? I think they probably would be much more opposed to this idea than they are opposed to the solution.
All right.
And this is where the international is now.
Right. I want to turn from that, Amotz, to another major development on Monday, and this is the prosecution at the International Criminal Court requesting arrest warrants for Israeli and Palestinian leaders. And among the Israeli leaders they're looking for arrest warrants for is the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. What do you make of this?
Well, that's
I think this
Sorry, Amotz, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm saying it's a farce, and it's part of the broader UN ecosystem, which has become a tool for the promotion of profoundly anti-Western causes, and it will reach nowhere once again, because this is totally unilateral, totally far-fetched, and propagandist. I mean, do they really think that the world will believe that what Hamas did and what it stands for and what its agenda is all about is on one plane with what Benjamin Netanyahu represents? Benjamin Netanyahu, war to know, is right now conducting a war of defense. No matter how many times people will say genocide, that's not what is happening down there. That is not what genocide is, heaven forfend. This is a war of defense. These are people who are out to annihilate us Jews and have demonstrated their willingness and their ability to do mass murder and atrocities on an unthinkable scale. No one has, for now, found a method, not one that they shared with us, for fighting the kind of war that they wage, namely the kind of war that deliberately and systematically hides the warriors among the population. It's a tremendous tragedy, but this is what it's about. That is why I say that this whole legal effort is a farce and it's going to get nowhere.
Okay. Edmund Ghareeb, I mean, there are various ways to look at this action by the International Criminal Court, and there was an interesting take, which was in the political newspaper, which is published here in Washington, called Politico, and they say the ICC may have actually saved Benjamin Netanyahu. It says, at a time when big cracks were beginning to appear in his war coalition, the ICC ruling could lead to the cabinet and the general population in the country rallying around their prime minister, who'd be seen as being in an embattled position right now. What do you think of that?
Well, to a certain extent, there is truth in that. What we've begun to see is that there are a lot of forces in Israel which have been, some of them have been critical of Netanyahu and his government and its policies. Nevertheless, they're going to rally around the flag. I mean, that is to be, I think, a likely possibility. However, at the same time that we see this, we have also seen major divisions taking place within Israel. There are a lot of people, especially the families of the hostages, who are very critical of what Prime Minister Netanyahu and government have been doing. We saw recently a clash between some of the settlers where the Israeli minister, Ben-Gvir, pulled his gun on the protesters, and one of his bodyguards had to keep him from raising his gun up. So there are a lot of differences. We're seeing constant protests taking place in a number of cities in Israel. But I think what's the most significant thing is that this decision, however, on the one hand, it is a very bold step in international law enforcement. But it also, I agree, it opens up a complex diplomatic legal challenge to different parties, particularly to the outsiders. There have been threats made against judges. There have been threats made against the prosecutor general, basically. And all of this raises question about what's going on. This is by U.S. members of Congress.
Right.
Sorry.
Aside Arikat, you know, Israeli leaders are asked on an almost daily basis, both inside Israel as well as outside Israel, where is this going? Where is this conflict headed to? And, you know, we've had some answers, and one of the answers I read to you earlier with the Prime Minister saying that Israel, together with Palestinian allies would take control of Gaza. But what about the Palestinian leadership? Where do they think this is going?
Well, you would have to pose that question to the Palestinian leadership, but I can tell you what the Palestinian people think. You know, it is obvious by now that Israel has not been able to achieve any of its goals militarily. So they tried to achieve what they could not achieve militarily by first bombing people and killing people and destroying people and committing genocide. You know, have a well-organized, orchestrated starvation campaign in terms of military campaigns and so on. So that Israel has done so. But in fact, you know, it has not been able to free the hostages as they said they would. It has not been able to decapitate Hamas as they said they would. It has not been able to hunt the leadership as they did. They said they would. Okay. In fact, the cracks are in the occupation army, because occupation armies ultimately will be defeated, no matter what. No matter what, no matter how strong they are. We know that the United States sustained this aggression, sustained this genocide by, you know, pouring billions of dollars, as we have seen a couple of weeks ago, $26 billion they pour into this criminal machine that is Israel. So, but ultimately, I mean, the Palestinians are not going anywhere. They will continue to fight, and they will continue to prevail. You know, look at the world today. I mean, look at all the demonstrations that are happening. Israel is a pariah. Israel has become really known for what it actually is. That it is a criminal state that conducts genocide and criminality, not only in this campaign, but all along for the past 76 years. So I think where this is headed, ultimately, this occupation cannot be sustained.
Right. I'm running out of time. I've only got a minute. Amotz, what is the situation with the war cabinet right now? I mean, these expressions of unhappiness with the Prime Minister were expressed by Benny Gantz. He's one of the senior members of that war cabinet. There was a very pointed reference in his criticism to Benjamin Netanyahu, accusing him of acting in his own interest rather than in the interest of the country.
Well, the situation is that Benny Gantz has handed an ultimatum publicly to Netanyahu that expires roughly 3 weeks from here. And the general feeling among analysts here is that this ticking clock is unwindable, and meaning that this government will lose its centrist component. And then Netanyahu, as of next month, according to this prediction, will be left with only the right-wing hardcore of his coalition. And then you ask for my assessment, this will not last. We'll go to an election and emerge with a more centrist alternative that, God willing, will progress towards a two-state solution.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.